They say the suburbs are supposed to be quiet, peaceful, predictable. That's why I moved here, after my wife passed, looking for a small patch of calm where I could live out the next chapter of my life. I wasn't chasing luxury, just sustainability. I wanted something honest, rooted, and real. That's how the chickens came in. I'm not a flashy man. Name's Tom Carver. Mid-50s, ex-electrician widower. And if you ask anyone at the hardware store or the post office, the Eggman of Maple Glen. That's what folks started calling me. Not because I was some kind of novelty, but because every morning without fail, I delivered cartons of fresh eggs to a little network of people who needed them. It wasn't a business, not really. It started with Mrs. Layton, my neighbor, with arthritis, who couldn't get to the grocery store anymore. Then it was the single mom across the street, then the preschool downtown, then the old diner with the peeling red booths that made the best biscuits this side of the state. I built that coop myself. Nothing fancy, plywood frame, secure mesh, insulated roof. I poured a little concrete foundation so the foxes wouldn't burrow in. The hens had names: Ruby, Dot, Lucy, Goldie, and Belle. Every morning around 6:15, they'd start clucking soft at first, then louder, announcing the new eggs like clockwork. I'd be out there with my coffee in one hand and feed in the other boots, still wet with dew. And for the longest time, no one complained. Maple Glen had a homeowners association, sure, but they left me alone for years. The rules were mostly about trash cans and mailbox color. I never made a fuss, paid my dues, mowed on schedule, didn't throw parties. I even helped some of the older neighbors with their porch wiring or gutter cleanings. That's the kind of man I was taught to be. You pitch in. But something changed last summer. A new woman moved in down the block, sharp blonde bob, spotless white SUV, and an attitude that could wrinkle steel. I didn't think much of it until she came marching up my driveway one morning in a pink jogging outfit, her tiny dog barking from her hip like a siren. "Excuse me," she shouted over the clucks, "are those chickens?" I smiled politely. "Yes, ma'am. Just 5 hens, no roosters." She looked appalled. "Well, they're loud. And I don't think that's allowed here." "They've been here for 5 years," I said gently. "Never had a complaint." "Well, I'm complaining now," she snapped, and turned on her heel without so much as a goodbye. I should have known then. I should have seen it coming. A week later, I got a notice in the mailbox. Plain white envelope. Maple Glen HOA. In the corner. Notice of non-compliance, unauthorized animal husbandry. The letter was terse, citing Section 9.2b of the HOA covenant. It accused me of housing livestock within a residential property line, warned of a $100 per day fine, and demanded immediate removal of all animals. It was signed by the new HOA president. Her name was Karen Whitmore's. I blinked at the paper, then read it again. And again. "Livestock," I muttered aloud. "They're hens." I brought the letter to Mr. Atwood, 2 doors down. He'd been in Maple Glen since it was all farmland. "That clause is for pigs and goats," he said. "Never applied it to hens. Everyone knows you got them." "I've had them longer than she's lived here," I said. He nodded. "They're looking for a fight." For the first time in a long while, I felt something beneath my ribs. An ache not just from grief or solitude, but a different kind of pain. The kind that comes from being seen as a problem in your own home. I called the HOA office, got a receptionist who sounded barely out of high school. "You'll need to speak with the board directly," she said. "I'd like to appeal," I told her. "They'll be sending an inspection notice." 2 mornings later, they arrived. A man in a short-sleeved dress shirt holding a clipboard, and a woman with a badge that read, "Compliance Officer." Karen trailed behind, arms folded like a queen surveying a province. They didn't knock, just walked right into the yard while I was feeding the hens. Belle clucked curiously and pecked at Karen's pristine sneaker. Karen yelped. "Sir," the officer said, "you are officially in violation of HOA code." I stood tall. "They're egg-laying hens, no roosters, no commercial activity. I'm within state guidelines and town zoning." "This isn't a town issue," she snapped. "This is a community issue, and your chickens are causing a disturbance." Karen smirked. The officer handed me a formal citation with a compliance deadline. "Remove all poultry within 10 days or face cumulative fines." That night, I sat on the porch with a thermos of coffee going cold and the coop lights glowing in the dusk. Lucy fluffed her feathers on the perch. Dot let out a sleepy chirp. It wasn't noise, it was life. But life apparently wasn't what the HOA wanted anymore. 10 days. 10 days to give up something that fed people, gave me peace, and hurt no one. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept hearing the silence that would follow. I spent the next few days trying to keep things quiet. Not just in the yard, but in my head. I figured if I laid low, maybe someone on the HOA board would come to their senses. Maybe Karen would get distracted with her next crusade a basketball hoop left out overnight, or a driveway stain that looked too much like freedom. But that hope got crushed faster than an egg under a boot. 3 days after the citation, I received another envelope. Certified mail this time. The kind that makes your stomach turn before you even open it. Inside was a thick packet, 9 pages, of HOA documentation, citations, fine schedules, and most insultingly, a mandatory compliance acknowledgement form that I was expected to sign and return within 72 hours. What you are hereby notified. The first line read, that failure to remove said unauthorized livestock constitutes a breach of the Maple Glen Community Code and will result in daily financial penalties of $100 per day, compounded monthly, with the potential for legal action. They had highlighted legal action in yellow. Karen's signature was at the bottom again in that perfect cursive that made my jaw clench. I didn't sign it. I didn't throw it away either. I just let it sit there on my kitchen table next to a carton of still warm eggs from Ruby and Dot. I stared at those eggs longer than I care to admit. They weren't just food. They were consistency, purpose, a small cycle of care in a world that kept spinning too fast. That night, I called my friend Old Pete. He used to be on the city council before he retired. We'd volunteered together years ago at the community garden. If anyone knew where the legal lines were drawn, it was him. This is overreach, Pete said, after I explained the situation. The HOA doesn't have the authority to override municipal zoning. Backyard hens are permitted within city limits. As long as you don't exceed 6 and don't have a rooster, you're fine. That's what I thought, I muttered. They're saying I'm breaking HOA covenant rules. Pete exhaled. They can write whatever they want in those covenants, but they're not above the law. Especially not when the coop predates half the houses in that neighborhood. You've got an argument and precedent. I scribbled notes as he spoke, case names, zoning clauses, where to find the municipal code online. My fingers ached from writing, but my brain started to buzz. I wasn't just some guy with chickens. I was a resident with rights, and I wasn't alone. The next day, I visited Mrs. Layton. She was sitting in her sunroom in a thick wool cardigan, the kind of woman whose smile felt like a porch light on a foggy road. They shut down your chickens, she asked, shocked. I nodded, said it was a noise issue. That's ridiculous, she said. You've brought me eggs every Tuesday since my hip surgery. I smiled, still warm when they got to you. She reached over and patted my hand. If they want to call this noise, they should hear my grandson's music. I left her house with a promise and a purpose. Over the next few days, I spoke to people I hadn't had real conversations with in years. The couple at the corner with 3 young kids who relied on my eggs because the store brands upset their son's allergies. The Vietnamese restaurant owner downtown who used my yolks for her secret custard recipe. The nurse from the health clinic who got free cartons every week for the seniors she visited. Word started to spread, and as if to fan the flames, the HOA doubled down. A third letter arrived, this one printed on thick paper with a watermark and everything. It stated that since I had failed to comply by the stated deadline, fines were now in effect, and a lien would be placed against my property if the balance exceeded $2,500. They enclosed a running balance sheet. According to them, I already owed 9. I laughed, actually laughed. A short, bitter bark that startled Belle in the coop. I was standing in my driveway holding the letter like it was some kind of sick joke, and I realized I hadn't felt this mad since the night my wife died and the hospital handed me a brochure instead of answers. Enough was enough. I went inside, pulled out a manila folder from my file cabinet, and began building my own case. I included printouts from the town zoning website, my original Coop permit from 5 years ago, and a copy of the city's urban agriculture initiative that listed hens under permitted backyard animals. I found the clause that allowed up to 6 hens per household with proper sanitation. Then I wrote a letter. Not an angry one, a precise one. The kind of letter that sounds calm because it doesn't have to yell. I addressed it to the entire HOA board, not just Karen, to whom it may concern. I am writing in response to your citations dated X and X. The chickens housed on my property are fully compliant with the municipal code outlined in Chapter 14, Section 3 of Maple Glen's Urban Agricultural Regulations. I have attached the appropriate documentation for your review, including my existing co-op permit and legal zoning allowances. Please be advised that any further attempt to enforce penalties outside the bounds of municipal law will be viewed as harassment and will be responded to accordingly through legal counsel. I signed it, made 5 copies, sent them registered mail. Then I sat back and waited. But Karen didn't like being challenged. 4 days later, I found 2 HOA officers standing at the edge of my yard with a clipboard and a measuring tape. They said they were verifying proximity to neighboring property lines, claiming that the Coop might now be in violation of a new setback requirement just passed in a recent vote. I stood there in my boots, hands on my hips. You can pass all the votes you want, but you can't make them retroactive. They didn't respond, just kept measuring and scribbling. Ruby let out a loud squawk as they passed. I gave her a slow nod. I know, girl. They're chickens with rulers. I went inside and called Pete again. They're trying to bait you, he said. You've hit a nerve. What do I do now? He paused. You wait. The town can't ignore this much longer, especially if you're willing to talk. I didn't know what he meant at the time, but I would soon. Because less than a week later, the diner ran out of eggs for the first time in 6 years. And then everything started to crack. The first real sign that the town was starting to notice came from a place I knew like the back of my hand. Mel's Diner. It was a small beat-up building with a tin roof and a flickering neon open sign that had probably seen more sunrises than I had. Mel had owned it for decades. He made the best sausage gravy and biscuits west of the river, and he always used my eggs. Not because they were fancy or organic or labeled with a certification, just because they were real. I stopped by one morning just to grab coffee and found Mel pacing behind the counter like someone had lit a fire under his boots. Morning, Tom, he muttered without looking up. Something wrong. He tossed his towel on the counter. Out of eggs. I blinked. What do you mean out? I mean none. 0. The distributor's running short. Prices jumped. And yours, well, I know they shut you down. I nodded, the weight of it settling deeper into my chest. Sorry about that. Mel leaned forward, eyes sharp. You know the breakfast rush is half my business. And folks ain't coming in for pancakes with imitation mix. I know, I said quietly. A waitress brushed past us. We got another complaint about the egg sandwich, Mel. Customer said it tasted like cardboard. Mel sighed. First time we've gotten complaints in 3 years. We're bleeding here, Tom. It wasn't just about the eggs. I could see that. It was about people's expectations, what they relied on, what they thought would always be there until someone decided it shouldn't be. I stepped out of the diner into the morning sun and spotted Sarah, the preschool teacher, walking her bike across the street. Tom, she called. Hey, we've been meaning to reach you. I walked over, wiping my hands on my jeans. What's going on? We're scrambling, she said. Literally. We serve kids breakfast every morning. Most of them are from working families, and the school provides the only proper meal they get. The store jacked up prices, and the eggs we got last week were so pale the kids thought they were plastic. I'm sorry, I said again, that word starting to feel like a splinter in my mouth. The HOA shut the Coop down, cited me for noise. Sarah frowned. Noise? I live 3 blocks from you. All I ever hear is birdsong and the occasional wind chime. Well, apparently Karen thinks the hens are disturbing the peace. Sarah shook her head. That's ridiculous. I heard it again later that day at the church pantry where I donated eggs weekly to a little old nun named Sister Eleanor. She had a table of empty baskets and a clipboard in her hands. You're not the first, she said softly. Half our food partners are drying up, but your eggs were dependable. I stared at those baskets, empty, hungry symbols of a community unraveling, and something broke in me. This wasn't just about chickens anymore. That afternoon, I printed out 20 flyers. Nothing fancy. Just a black and white sheet that read, Why are our eggs gone? The HOA shut down Maple Glen's only backyard coop. A community resource shut down for noise. Meanwhile, our schools, diners, and families are left without. Ask your HOA. Ask your town leaders. Let's talk about who's really disturbing the peace. I stapled those flyers to poles at the grocery store, library, and corner gas station. I slid one under the glass at Mel's. I gave a few to Sarah, who promised to accidentally leave them at the preschool front desk. Within 48 hours, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Text messages, emails, Facebook tags from neighbors I hadn't seen since the block party 3 summers ago. They were furious, not just on my behalf, but on their own. Because suddenly they realized how much they'd depended on something they'd taken for granted. It wasn't just about eggs. It was about connection, local food, community rhythms. Even the newspaper got wind of it. A young reporter named Nadia called me from the hot Maple Glen Sentinel. "We've had 4 tips in one day," she said. "You mind if I stop by for a photo and some background?" "I've got no Coop to show you," I said bitterly. "Maybe that's the point," she replied. When she arrived, I showed her the locked structure. The padlock gleamed under the sun, and behind the mesh wire the hens stood confused and silent, their nesting area empty. I told her about the permits, the compliance, the noise complaint that had never been confirmed with a decibel meter. I handed her the HOA citations and my appeal letter. "You gave eggs to the daycare, the diner, the food pantry, and senior neighbors," she asked, scribbling fast. "I didn't think of it that way at the time," I admitted. "I just saw people who needed them." Nadia snapped a photo of Belle standing near the door, her feathers slightly puffed. 2 days later, the article dropped. Follow the Coop that fed a community and the HOA that shut it down. The picture was black and white, but the story wasn't. People read it. People reacted. Mel called me the next morning. 10 customers came in waving the paper. Said they were boycotting HOA-run vendors. Sarah emailed a PDF of a petition titled, "Bring Back the Hens." Within hours, it had 312 signatures. The next week, the mayor's office reached out. Pete had been right. The town couldn't ignore it any longer. But the HOA wasn't backing down. That same day, I received a 4th letter thicker than before. This one included a copy of the revised community noise standards and a fresh accusation refusal to acknowledge community leadership. I read that line twice. Refusal to acknowledge community leadership. I laughed out loud in my living room because I was the community. I'd spent the last 5 years feeding it, fixing fences, driving neighbors to the clinic, cleaning gutters for widows. What did Karen know about community? I wasn't alone anymore. That's what changed. This wasn't just me and the hens. This was us. And we were just getting started. It was a Tuesday morning when the real blow came. I was sitting on the porch sipping weak coffee and watching the sun bleed over the rooftops when a black SUV rolled into my driveway. Not a police cruiser, not a city vehicle, just one of those unmarked cars that looks official only because it's meant to. 2 men stepped out, both in tucked-in polos, with Maple Glen HOA stitched in dark thread on the breast. One had a clipboard. The other carried a tool bag. Behind them, I noticed a smaller sedan pull up, Karen herself, in her pristine beige Lexus, stepping out like she was about to cut a ribbon at a mall opening. Mr. Carver said, "Clipboard guy," approaching the porch. "You were notified that enforcement action would take place today." "I received threats and fines," I replied, standing up slowly. I was also told I had legal grounds to appeal. The appeal was denied by a special HOA vote. Karen interjected, climbing the steps without invitation. "You missed the window." "I never got a notice about a vote. It was announced on the HOA's private Facebook group," she said flatly. "I'm not on Facebook," I said. She gave a shrug that was more like a smirk. "Sounds like a personal problem." Clipboard guy stepped closer. "We are authorized to secure the structure and remove any active sources of noise or nuisance." "They're animals, not boomboxes," I said, already feeling the slow churn of fury in my stomach. Karen turned to toolbag guy and gave him a nod. He didn't speak, just walked around the side of the house and toward the coop like he was cutting through a parking lot. The hens started clucking immediately, sensing the shift in energy. I moved to intercept. "Don't touch that coop. I built it with my own hands. I have documentation, permits, licenses. We're within our rights," Clipboard said. "It's in the updated covenant bylaws." "You can't update bylaws and apply them retroactively," I snapped. "That's not how law works." Karen stepped closer. "We're not the law, Mr. Carver. We're the community." I took a deep breath and stared at her. "No. I am the community." She didn't flinch. "That's your opinion." With that, toolbag guy clipped the first lock with bolt cutters. The sound metal against metal, followed by the shrill squeal of Belle's panic, went through me like a bullet. The hens fluttered and squawked as he entered the coop with a pair of gloves and a long-handled net, like they were pests. "I'll call the police," I said, heart-pounding. Karen arched an eyebrow. "And tell them what? That your chickens are being removed under Community Enforcement Code. They're legal animals. This is private property. HOA jurisdiction supersedes in shared covenant zones." It was like arguing with a wall made of paperwork and smugness. I stepped aside and pulled out my phone anyway. I wasn't calling the police. I was recording. I turned on the video, stepped back, and filmed as Toolbag Guy chased Lucy around the nesting box like a cartoon villain. The hens shrieked, feathers flying. Dot huddled in the corner wings, trembling. They caught 3. Ruby broke loose and Ann hid behind the water barrel. Belle, my brave little clucker, pecked Toolbag Guy on the wrist hard enough to draw blood. He cursed loudly, shook his hand, and stormed out. Karen called someone and demanded animal control backup. I kept recording. 10 minutes later, they zip-tied the coop shut and slapped a red violation sticker on the side panel. "Unauthorized structure. Do not remove." Karen smoothed her skirt and gave me a parting glance. "You brought this on yourself, Tom." I didn't say a word. Just stared at her through the camera until she turned and walked away. When they drove off, the yard felt like a crime scene. I unlocked the coop and stepped inside. Dot was still trembling in the corner. Belle paced like a sentry. Ruby peeked out from behind the barrel, eyes wide. I sat on the wooden step inside the coop and cried. Not loud, not for long. Just the kind of quiet, exhausted weeping that comes when something sacred has been torn from you and you can't scream because the damage is already done. The next day, the silence set in. It wasn't just the absence of clucking or morning routine. It was the dull void that settled across the neighborhood like fog. My mornings no longer had rhythm. No warm eggs to collect, no familiar flurry of feathers, no soft gossiping sounds as the sun rose. I sat on the porch and listened to nothing. A lawnmower in the distance, a passing car, an occasional dog bark, but nothing alive. Neighbors slowed their walks near my driveway. Some offered nods, others short words of sympathy. Mrs. Layton came by with a Tupperware of cookies. She didn't say anything, just left them on the porch rail and squeezed my arm. The preschool called. Tom Sarah said we read the article. The parents are furious. "I wish I could help," I said. "You did," she replied. "We just didn't realize how much." Then Mel called. "We've lost 15% of breakfast orders. Customers say it's not the same. They ask about you." I didn't have a reply. I just sat in that quiet. Then came the texts. One by one, neighbors started sharing photos, empty grocery shelves, signs that read, "Limit 1 carton per customer." Some sent screenshots of rising egg prices. One woman from the next subdivision sent me a video, her toddler wailing because his scrambled eggs were too white and too weird. It would have been funny if it weren't so deeply sad. That's when I realized something. The silence wasn't mine. It was everyone's. We were all experiencing the same void, and that made it louder than any clucking ever could be. I went online and uploaded the video I'd taken during the shutdown. No narration. Just the footage of Karen and her henchmen tearing apart a peaceful corner of my yard. I titled it, "When the HOA Took Our Hens." It didn't go viral, not right away, but it sparked something. By the end of the week, the video had 8,000 views, then 12,000. Comments flooded in, some angry, some heartbroken, many shocked. "Unbelievable. This is abuse. My grandma used to raise chickens. These people have no soul. HOA power trip. I'd move out immediately. This is why local food matters." The silence wasn't quiet anymore. It was about to become a roar. 2 weeks. That's how long it took before Maple Glen started to feel the sting. At first, it was just a mild inconvenience, a note taped to the grocery store fridge saying no local eggs this week. Then came the price hikes. A carton of generic white eggs jumped from $2.49 to $4.89. The organic ones out of stock entirely. Then the diner had to rewrite their menu. "Tom, I had to take down the breakfast combo," Mel told me over the phone, frustration crackling through the receiver. "No eggs, no combo, no combo, no customers. This is bleeding me dry." By the end of that week, the town's weekend farmers market had a laminated sign near the entrance. "Eggs currently unavailable. We appreciate your patience." It wasn't just Maple Glen anymore. It was the whole township. Turns out my little coop had been the last locally producing egg source left in the area, and nobody realized it until it was gone. But people were waking up, and fast. The Maple Glen Sentinel printed a second piece, this one with a 2-column spread. The headline was bold and unrelenting. HOA Power Grab Creates Egg Shortage Crisis. By Nadia Cruz. She didn't hold back this time. She interviewed Mel Sarah from the preschool and even Sister Eleanor from the food pantry, who called the hens a blessing disguised in feathers. Nadia quoted city code-pulled stats from the county agriculture office and even included screenshots of angry social media comments directed at the HOA's page. One quote from Karen stood out in its own box. "We enforce rules for the good of the whole community." Beneath it in bold, "But who decides what's good and who gets left behind?" I'd never seen our little paper write like that. 2 days later, I was stopped 3 times on a single walk to the post office. First was Joe Rankin, a retired vet who used to keep bees until the HOA banned insect farming. "Should have known they'd come for you next," he said, tapping the side of his cap. "I've still got the old signs for my protest if you want them." Next was Tanya, the young mom with twin boys and a constant look of exhaustion. "My kids used to like breakfast," she said. "Now it's tears over cereal every morning." And then Miss Rivera, the music teacher from the elementary school, who pressed a soft hand to my shoulder and whispered, "You did nothing wrong, Tom." And they know it. I went home that evening and found 24 eggs sitting on my porch, store-bought but with a note. "Wish they were yours. Until then, we're with you." The next morning, someone left a handmade sign at the end of my driveway. "Bring back the hens. Let the community breathe." It was painted in yellow and green, the colors of spring. I don't know who made it. I left it up. That weekend, Mel organized a small community breakfast rally. He moved a few tables out into the diner's parking lot, served pancakes and bacon without eggs, and let people vent. About prices, about the HOA, about the way power had turned something as simple as food into a battlefield. Pete showed up too and brought a councilwoman from the city board. Monica Lee. She looked young but sharp, the kind of woman who didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I've been watching this closely," she told me after I introduced myself. "What the HOA did may violate the city's urban agriculture protections. If so, we'll bring it up at the next zoning commission meeting." I blinked. "You mean they could be overruled?" She smiled faintly. "They can be humbled." But it wasn't just the government stirring, it was the people. On Monday, Sarah's petition hit 2,000 signatures. By Wednesday, a group of parents from the preschool started a letter-writing campaign. Then, the town's Facebook group exploded threads, 100 comments, deep many with videos of kids holding protest signs that read, "I miss Ruby's eggs. And let Doc come home." No more egg tyranny. The media picked it up next. First local news, then a food blogger with 100,000 followers who posted the video of Karen standing smug in my yard while the hens shrieked in the background. She titled it, "The HOA That Killed Breakfast." And it hit a nerve. By the weekend, I was sitting on my porch again, but this time, not in silence. I had visitors, supporters, even reporters. One woman drove in from 2 towns over with a basket of garden vegetables and a thermos of homemade soup. "I saw the story," she said. "I'm a widow too. Lost my husband 4 years ago. I raise quail. They wanted to shut me down last year." "What happened?" I asked. "I fought back," she smiled, "and I won." She paused, then added, "So will you." That night, as I watered the tomatoes that bordered the now empty coop, I thought about all the people who had quietly depended on me. On Belle, on Ruby and Dot and Lucy and Goldie. They weren't just chickens. They were the fabric of something real. I pulled out the crate of legal documents again. Pete had highlighted everything I'd need. I studied until my eyes burned. Ordinances, precedents, charter loopholes. And then I made a decision. I would not wait for the city, or the media, or even the HOA to change its mind. I was going to stand up at the next town meeting and speak not as a victim, but as a representative of every person who'd ever been told that their way of living was too loud, too messy, or not HOA compliant enough. I wasn't just defending my chickens. I was defending what it meant to belong. The town hall meeting was set for Thursday evening. I remember that morning clearly, not because the sky was blue or the birds were out, but because Belle stood near the coop door, her head tilted as if waiting for the usual routine that had vanished. She hadn't laid an egg since the day they locked the coop. None of them had. I washed up, put on my only clean-collared shirt, and tucked the manila folder of documents into my shoulder bag. It felt like carrying the last pieces of something sacred. I didn't rehearse what I'd say. I didn't need to. Every word had been fermenting inside me for weeks, ripening like an old truth finally ready to be spoken aloud. When I pulled into the town hall lot, I expected a modest crowd, maybe a few familiar faces, a smattering of support. Instead, I found the entire parking lot full, and cars lined down the side street. A local TV van sat idling near the entrance. Inside the place was packed, standing room only. The folding chairs were filled with neighbors, restaurant owners, parents, kids, even the mayor. Pete stood near the back with a quiet smile, nodding me toward the front row. Karen was there too, sitting beside the HOA board, with her arms crossed, lips pursed tight, like she was chewing something sour. I didn't make eye contact with her. The city council president, an older man named Byron Hale, opened the meeting with his usual monotone budget updates, traffic concerns, upcoming paving schedules. No one cared. You could feel it. Every person in that room was waiting. Then he cleared his throat. We now open the floor to public comment regarding local zoning concerns, specifically those related to urban agriculture and the recent HOA enforcement action in Maple Glen. Pete leaned over and whispered, "Go." I stood up, walked slowly to the podium, and adjusted the microphone. My knees didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. That surprised even me. "My name is Tom Carver," I began. "I live at 128 Redfield Lane in Maple Glen. For the last 5 years, I've raised a small group of hens in my backyard, hens that have never caused harm, that met every zoning requirement, and that provided fresh eggs to neighbors, school children, seniors, and the local diner." I paused. The room was dead quiet. 3 weeks ago, the HOA shut down my coop, citing noise. They did so without warning, without community input, and in violation of the very municipal laws this town passed to protect urban agriculture. I held up a printout of the city ordinance. They ignored my permit. They bypassed the appeal process. And they called in a private enforcement team to padlock the structure and seize the animals, some of whom were injured in the process. A few gasps echoed through the room. I didn't look toward Karen. I kept going. Since then, our town has faced an egg shortage. Grocery shelves are empty. Prices are up. Local businesses are hurting. The preschool has stopped serving eggs to its students. And the people, your people, are angry. I placed the folder on the podium, opened it, and held up the petition. Over 2,000 signatures from this town. From these seats, people who believe that what happened wasn't just overreach, it was personal and dangerous. I lowered the papers. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for accountability and for protection. Not just for me, but for every resident in every HOA who's been bullied into silence. It's time we draw a line. I stepped back, and for a moment I thought the silence might crush me. Then someone clapped. Then another. And then the room erupted, not in chaos, but in something far more powerful, collective noise. A rising tide of applause that felt like thunder rolling down from the rafters. Councilwoman Monica Lee stood next. She looked straight at the board and said, "What Mr. Carver described is not only disturbing, it may be actionable. I move that the council formally investigate the Maple Glen HOA for overreach and potential zoning violations." Someone seconded it. A vote was called. Every hand went up unanimous. Karen stood up suddenly. The HOA acted in the interest of order, she said loud enough to be heard. "We have the authority to—" No, Councilman Hale interrupted, his voice sharp for the first time all night. "You have the authority to maintain landscaping and collect dues. You do not have the right to override municipal law." That ends now. It felt like someone had cracked a window in a suffocating room. I sat down. My hands were steady. My heart was full. After the meeting, I couldn't make it to the door for nearly 20 minutes. People surrounded me, shaking my hand, patting my back, thanking me. Some were crying. Sarah brought me a handmade drawing from the preschoolers, a stick figure man with a coop and 5 smiling chickens. Mel handed me a new mug. It read, "Eggman of Maple Glen." Karen brushed past me without a word, her heels clicking like angry punctuation marks. As I walked to my truck, Pete joined me, his expression quiet but proud. "You didn't just save your chickens," he said. You woke a sleeping town. I didn't respond. I just looked up at the stars, bright and still. For the first time in weeks, I felt something return to me, something not even a flock of hens could give. My dignity, my voice, and the sense that I wasn't standing alone anymore. The days that followed the town hall meeting were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I'd gone from a quiet man with chickens to a symbol in the local paper, a guest on morning radio, and strangely enough, the subject of a high school civics class discussion. A teacher emailed to say her students were debating citizen resistance to HOA overreach, and most of them were firmly on the side of the Eggman. But it wasn't fame I felt. It was something deeper, a shift. The town, once silent, in the face of HOA authority, had found its voice, and it was loud, direct, and unafraid. The Facebook group, We Stand with Tom and the Hens, surpassed 3,000 members in 5 days. A cafe downtown offered a Karen-free omelet with a side of solidarity toast. Mel's Diner painted a mural of Ruby on the alley-facing wall wearing sunglasses and standing on a protest sign. Karen, meanwhile, had gone silent, at least publicly. But her silence was not surrender. I found that out when a certified letter arrived one afternoon from the HOA's legal representative. Not a community forum this time. This was a cease and desist, accusing me of public defamation, incitement against the association, and willful damage to the reputation of board members. I laughed when I read it. Then I scanned it, sent it to Pete, and called him. He didn't laugh. This means they're panicking, he said, but also that they're trying to scare you into backing down. Don't respond directly. I'll have our friend from the Civic Legal Clinic look into it. He did more than that. Pete got me a 15-minute meeting with the assistant city attorney, a woman named Rachel Kim, sharp as a tack and calmer than a stone in water. She read the letter, looked over my documentation, then leaned back in her chair. They have no case, she said. You didn't defame them. You reported the truth. You have video witness statements, legal zoning support, and a town ordinance on your side. So what do? I asked. You get ready, she said. For what? For the next board meeting. This isn't over until it's on record. She was right. Maple Glen HOA held monthly meetings at a rec center on the edge of the subdivision, a bland beige building with too much concrete and too little light. I'd only ever been to one years ago where they discussed fence heights and landscaping guidelines. It had bored me to tears. But this was different. I arrived early and watched people file in. Not just residents, but supporters from town, restaurant owners, parents, even a few city officials. Sarah brought cupcakes with tiny chicken toppers. One teenage girl had a handmade sign, HOA can't handle the cluck. When Karen walked in, flanked by 2 board members, the air turned to glass. Her eyes flicked to me, and I could tell she wasn't expecting this many people. She wore a neutral expression, but her knuckles were white on her notebook. They started with routine agenda items. Budgets, landscaping complaints, a dispute over Halloween decorations. Then came new business. Karen cleared her throat. We will now address the ongoing controversy surrounding the enforcement of HOA policy regarding livestock, specifically poultry, within Maple Glen. A murmur rippled through the room. She continued, while we acknowledge the emotional responses from certain residents, it is our duty to remind everyone that rules exist for a reason. Noise, sanitation, property values, these are not abstract concepts. They affect us all. I stood up. I'd like to respond to that. Karen opened her mouth to object, but the board president, a tired-looking man named Dennis, who hadn't said much all night, raised his hand. Go ahead, Tom. I took a breath. You talk about rules like they're sacred, but you ignore the context they're supposed to serve. My coop wasn't a problem until one person moved in and decided it was. No noise complaints, no health violations, no disruption. Just 5 hens feeding a community. I turned to the room. This HOA didn't ask us what we needed. They dictated. They enforced. They acted like they were bigger than the neighborhood. But look around, this is the neighborhood. Applause erupted. Karen snapped her folder shut. I remind everyone that this is a private board meeting. It's a community meeting, someone called out. We elect you, said another. You work for us. Karen's face flushed crimson. Dennis cleared his throat. We've reviewed the zoning ordinances. The coop was legal, the removal was not. Karen whipped toward him. That's not what we agreed to. It's what I decided, he said firmly. I'm the president, and I'm tired of cleaning up your messes. She fell silent. For once, she had nothing to say. Then Dennis turned back to the room. I propose We reinstate Mr. Carver's rights to maintain his Coop, effective immediately. I also propose we suspend the enforcement committee pending an internal review. A cheer went up. Karen tried to interrupt again, but Dennis cut her off. You've embarrassed this board, Karen, and this community. The vote passed 4-1. She was the one. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I just stood there feeling something deep and calm settle into my bones. Justice. After the meeting, Karen left quickly. No one followed her. No one thanked her. But dozens of people came to shake my hand. Even Dennis. I should have spoken up sooner, he admitted. We all should have, I replied. Outside, the air smelled of lilacs and soil. I got in my truck, drove home, and when I pulled into my driveway, I saw something new. A basket on my porch. Inside it, a dozen brown eggs. No note. Just a quiet gesture from someone who understood what it meant to give something back. The next morning, I unlocked the coop. The girls were nervous at first. Belle paced. Ruby fluttered her wings. But Dot settled into the straw head low and eyes soft. 10 minutes later, she laid the first egg. It was warm in my palm the way it always had been. The silence was over. The hens were home. With the coop reopened, and the hens safely back where they belonged, I should have felt at peace. And in a way, I did. The mornings returned to their rhythm, coffee clucks, the soft scrape of a wooden crate against fresh straw. But I knew it wasn't over. Not really. Not while the HOA still had unchecked power, and Karen was still sitting on that board licking her wounds and plotting her next move. So I did what I'd always done. I went to work. Not with my hands this time, but with paper. With research. With the help of a few people who knew their way around codes and clauses better than most lawyers. Pete and I met 3 evenings that week in the back room of Mel's diner. He brought city planning maps, I brought HOA documents, every one I had ever received copied, annotated, and spread across the checkered tablecloths, like we were preparing for a courtroom war. The goal wasn't just to fight. It was to build a wall they couldn't knock down next time. Look here, Pete said, tapping a highlighted paragraph from the HOA charter. This clause gives the enforcement committee the right to impose emergency measures, but there's no requirement for board approval before action. Meaning they can send people to your yard without a vote, I said. Exactly. It's vague enough to justify almost anything if they label it an urgent nuisance. We spent hours parsing through the language. Hidden in legalese were more cracks than I expected clauses that contradicted city law powers that conflicted with state homeowner protection statutes and provisions that had been updated without member-wide notification, which was required under the original charter. I could drive a tractor through these loopholes, Pete muttered. And so we did. I contacted Rachel Kim again, the assistant city attorney, who had helped me earlier. This time I asked for a formal review of the HOA's charter in light of city ordinances and urban agriculture policies. It took her 3 days to reply. When she did, her voice was sharper than before. We're opening an investigation into Maple Glen HOA's enforcement procedures, she said. What we're seeing may not only be illegal, it may be grounds for city intervention. City intervention. If the HOA is found to have violated zoning law in a systematic or reckless manner, the city has the right to revoke their enforcement autonomy. They'd need board recertification, possibly re-election, maybe even face civil liability. It was more than I'd hoped for. Still, I knew what I had to do next. I returned to the town hall this time, not to speak but to file. I submitted a formal complaint backed by over 40 witness statements, receipts, and 2 annotated binders. The city clerk raised her eyebrows as she flipped through the pages. You sure you're not a lawyer? She asked. No, I smiled. Just a man who likes his chickens and his peace. At home, I focused on the hens. Dot had returned to her old habits first, nesting early, laying smooth golden-yolked eggs that I delivered personally to Mrs. Layton to Mel's to the preschool. Ruby followed, then Belle Lucy, and finally Goldie. It was like their silence had been lifted with the weight of fear. One afternoon, as I was scooping feed, Belle stopped and looked at me, tilted her head, gave one soft cluck, and went back to pecking. It felt like a thank you. Or maybe a warning. Either way, I understood. Meanwhile, the town was buzzing. The Sentinel published a 3rd article. 1 man, 5 hens, and the loophole that shook Maple Glen. This time, it was more than just Nadia reporting. State papers picked it up. A columnist from the Watch Tribune wrote a scathing op-ed on HOA tyranny. A public radio show called and asked me to speak. I declined. I wasn't doing this for attention. I was doing it because it mattered. Then came the city council's special session. I didn't even have to speak this time. Rachel Kim laid it out with surgical precision how the HOA had violated transparency, bypassed vote requirements, and used retroactive enforcement in direct conflict with local law. Karen was there red-lipped and stiff-jawed, flanked by her lawyer. She tried to interrupt, once claiming that order must take precedence over chaos. But Rachel replied with a calm, "I envied order imposed without consent is not order, it's control." The council voted unanimously to suspend the Maple Glen HOA's enforcement powers pending a complete charter audit. It was a clean, swift cut. Karen didn't show her face in public for weeks after that. The remaining board members quietly issued a letter to the community, an apology, without saying the word sorry. They called it a period of reflection and necessary recalibration. I called it what it was, defeat. But I didn't celebrate, not in the way some people expected. Instead, I hosted a quiet gathering in my backyard. A long wooden table set under the trees, pitchers of lemonade, deviled eggs from Dot and Goldie biscuits from Mel, and laughter that rolled like music through the soft breeze. The hens wandered freely again, pecking near the fence, occasionally stopping to rest in the shade. Sarah brought the preschoolers who ran around trying to pet Lucy. Mrs. Layton wore her Sunday sweater. Even Dennis from the HOA board showed up with his wife and a homemade quiche. No one talked about Karen. No one talked about power or enforcement. We talked about eggs, about family, about how easily things fall apart, and how sometimes if you're willing to stand and speak, they can be stitched back together stronger than before. At the end of the evening, just as the sun dipped behind the pines, Belle laid a perfect egg in a corner of the yard. A little boy picked it up, held it to the light, and whispered, "It's still warm." So was the world. So was everything. It was early October when I got the envelope. This time, not certified. No threats. Just cream-colored stationery with the Maple Glen HOA seal faintly embossed in gold on the flap. It had the weight of something delicate, something reluctant. Inside a single sheet, typed, formal. And at the bottom, her name, Karen Whitmore. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Carver, on behalf of the Maple Glen Homeowners Association, I would like to acknowledge the impact that recent enforcement decisions have had on both you and our broader community. While actions were taken in accordance with our understanding of HOA policy, we now recognize that those decisions lacked proper transparency, adequate consideration, and failed to reflect the values of our residents. Please consider this a formal notice of policy revision and a reinstatement of your full rights to maintain a compliant backyard co-op, as previously permitted. We also extend our gratitude for your civic engagement and advocacy. Sincerely, Karen Whitmore, HOA board member." It wasn't the apology I wanted, but it was the one she was forced to write. I placed the letter on my kitchen table beside the bowl of fresh eggs I had gathered that morning, still warm from Belle and Dot. The contrast made me smile. Bureaucracy and life side by side. One stiff and calculated, the other warm and unfiltered. I didn't reply, not yet. 2 days later, I received a call from Dennis, the HOA president. His tone was awkward, but earnest. "Tom, I know things have been tense. That's one word for it. We're holding a special meeting, open to all residents. Karen's stepping down, and we'd like you to be there when she makes the announcement." I didn't respond right away. "I think the community would want that," he added. "Will she actually apologize?" I asked. There was a pause. "I don't know, but I think she'll try." The meeting was held at the same rec center. This time, the folding chairs were neatly spaced, a fresh coat of paint lined the trim, and a banner hung across the front table. Community First, a new season. I walked into quiet nods and whispers. No fanfare, no applause. Just acknowledgement. Karen sat stiffly at the center of the board, dressed in neutral tones, her signature red lipstick dulled to something less bold. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but energetically. Like someone who had spent weeks living with silence and found it much heavier than she'd expected. Dennis opened the meeting with a short statement. "Tonight we turn a page," he said. "We've reviewed our procedures, we've admitted our mistakes, and one of our board members has chosen to take personal responsibility." All eyes turned to her. Karen rose slowly, adjusting the single sheet of paper in her hand. Her eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly when they met mine. "I'd like to make a statement," she said, her voice even. "I moved to Maple Glen to find peace," she began. I believe strongly in rules in order in the comfort of structure. I thought I was helping this community by enforcing those values. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of the people behind the policies. She cleared her throat. My actions toward Mr. Carver were based on a rigid reading of bylaws and a personal discomfort I never interrogated. I did not listen. I did not consider the broader impact, and for that I am truly sorry. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. She continued, I'm resigning from the board effective immediately. I believe that leadership requires humility, and I have learned that lesson the hard way. She sat down, folded her hands, and stared at the table. I didn't clap. No one did. The silence was thicker than any applause. But it wasn't hostile. It was respectful. It took me a moment to realize that forgiveness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just settles in quietly, like an ache leaving the body. After the meeting, Karen approached me by the coffee table, where someone had placed a tray of sugar cookies shaped like chickens. Mr. Carver, she said. I meant what I said. I studied her. There was no smugness now, just a tired woman with tight shoulders and regret in her eyes. I know, I said. Is there anything I can do to make it right? You did, I replied. You stepped down. She gave a short nod. I underestimated what those hens meant to people. They're more than hens, I said. They're hope. They're rhythm. They're continuity in a world that doesn't offer much. I see that now, she whispered. I didn't before. I didn't need her to say anything else. When I left that night, I passed a row of kids drawing chalk chickens on the sidewalk. One wrote Ages il love in huge letters complete with a yellow sun. Back home, Belle had left another egg in her favorite nesting spot. I picked it up, held it against the last of the daylight, and exhaled. The war was over, and even Karen knew it. The morning after Karen's resignation, the sky broke open in a drizzle, not enough to soak the ground, but enough to leave dewdrops hanging on the wire mesh of the coop like pearls strung through patience. The kind of morning that made everything feel new again. Dot laid first, like she always did, a quiet affirmation that the world was turning the way it should. Ruby followed. Belle perched higher than usual, surveying her small kingdom like a queen restored. It wasn't just a coop anymore. It was a monument to what we'd all endured and what we'd learned. Life went on, but it didn't go back. The town had changed. A week later, the city council passed a new ordinance, the Urban Homestead Protection Act. It was written in language so plain, even a fourth grader could understand. The law guaranteed the right of homeowners to maintain small-scale backyard agriculture within reasonable guidelines, and with a requirement for neighbor transparency. Coops raised beds, bee boxes, and even micro-greenhouses were explicitly protected. It passed 7-0. I was invited to the signing. Not because I was a politician, but because, as the mayor put it, Tom Carver made this possible without intending to. I didn't give a speech. I didn't need to. My name was in the title of the bill's introduction. That was enough. And then the stories started rolling in. First, Tanya, the mother with the twin boys, got city approval to build a small coop of her own. She named her first hen Sunshine and brought me a tiny framed photo of her kids feeding her in the backyard. Next, Joe Rankin dusted off his old beekeeping boxes and reapplied for a permit under the new ordinance. He delivered me a jar of golden honey with the label, buzzing back, thanks to Tom. Then Sister Eleanor restarted the church pantry's Egg Wednesday program with a small donation from the town budget and support from 5 new backyard farms that had popped up like mushrooms after rain. Even Mel updated the diner menu. The Shaw Eggman's Breakfast became the house special 2 fresh eggs any-style biscuits with honey and a small apology to Mother Nature. It sold out nearly every day. I found myself back in rhythm, but this time not as the quiet man on the edge of the neighborhood. People waved as they passed my porch. Kids rode their bikes down the sidewalk and shouted updates about their chickens or their school projects about sustainability. The community garden committee asked me to speak at their harvest celebration. I declined politely, but promised to donate eggs and compost. And the coop! I rebuilt it. Not because the old one had failed, but because it deserved more. I added a second level with better insulation solar lights and a hand-carved sign above the door. Cluckingham Palace. The kids loved it. Belle approved. The day I finished the last nail, Pete dropped by with 2 lawn chairs and a 6-pack of root beer. You ever think a few hens would turn into this? He asked, settling in. Never, I said, smiling as Belle strutted past. He nodded toward the fresh white paint on the coop walls. Looks better than City Hall. I laughed. It's more honest, that's for sure. We sat in silence for a while, just listening to the breeze, the occasional cluck, the distant hum of life going on. Then Pete turned to me. You know what I've learned from all this? What? That resilience isn't loud. It just shows up every day, feeds its animals, and keeps going until people finally notice. I didn't say anything. I just clinked my root beer bottle against his and watched the sun drop behind the trees. Karen eventually moved. Not right away. But by early winter, her house was listed. Motivated seller, the ad read. Word was she took a job with a corporate HOA consultancy in another state. I didn't wish her harm. I just hoped she'd learned. Her old place went to a retired couple who asked on their first day if I could teach them about chicken feed ratios. I laughed and gave them my printout plus an extra bag of scratch grain as a welcome gift. I don't believe in revenge, but I do believe in poetic justice. One afternoon, I stood in the backyard watching the hens peck through fallen leaves and realized I felt something I hadn't in years. Not just relief, not just satisfaction, but rootedness. Like the land had finally opened its arms to me and said, you stayed, you fought. You're part of us now. It was never just about eggs. It was about being seen. It was about not being erased. And in the end, it wasn't the coop that needed rebuilding. It was the fabric of the town, the trust between neighbors, the reminder that small things like hens, like kindness, like standing up when it's uncomfortable, can ripple outward and rewrite the rules we thought were carved in stone. As I closed the gate behind me and walked toward the porch, Belle let out one short, sharp cluck. I turned. She stared at me. I gave her a nod. We did good, girl. And for the first time in a long time, everything, absolutely everything felt exactly as it should.